Welcome back. This is Chicken Philosophy. Ashtavakra Gita. Covered up the wrong side. Part 4. This is the fourth and final recital, because it's a short book, of Ashtavakra Gita on chicken philosophy. If this is the first of the Ashtavakra Gita recitals that you're seeing on chicken philosophy, then do please do yourself a favor and click here and start at the beginning, because it's lovely. And spoilers, we're almost finished. But for those who saw the whole thing, you already might recall, we skipped the foreword and the introduction. So today, what we're going to do is finish reciting the Ashtavakra Gita and then read that stuff, just so we can have a little bit more background about it. Cheers. Yeah. Okay. Now I was going to start this by saying, in the divine name of me, I declare this recital of Ashtavakra Gita duly opened. And if you have seen the other three, then that will make sense. And if you haven't, and maybe even if you have, you'll be like, I'm offended, in exactly that tone of voice. All right, I'm going to go ahead and start and finish at the same time. Oh, by the way, if you're like, this guy looks really familiar, but where have I seen him before? You've probably seen my main channel, the Esoteric Nerd podcast, which you can find by clicking there. It's better than this, so, ta-ta, if you decide to click that. And if you're like, no, that wasn't it. Wasn't his inner robe white? Then you must be recognizing me from my other main channel, VH Frater BT. That's me. BT is short for VH Frater BT. I go by BT when I'm on chicken philosophy. All right. My own splendor. Unironically, from many vantage points, both atheistic, secular, post-Puritan, descended from Protestants, American, whatever, or British, or religious, whether it be Eastern, Western, Northern, Southern. It might seem like, what? My own splendor? I worship myself. This book is actually dedicated to himself in a very loving way. And if you've read between the lines in some of the Sufi literature, you might be like, this Ashtavakra Gita reminds me a little bit of the Sufi literature. And if you've read way between the lines, like quantumly, like subatomically between the lines in some of the Teilhard de Chardin or other Christian or Catholic stuff, then you might be like, and then they'll burn you as a Gnostic heretic. I'll just keep reading. 19. My own splendor. With the pincers of youth I have plucked from the dark corners of my heart the thorn of many judgments. I sit in my own splendor, wealth or pleasure, duty or discrimination, duality or non-duality. What are they to me? What is yesterday, tomorrow, or today? What is space or eternity? I sit in my own radiance. What is the self or the not self? What is thinking or not thinking? What is good or evil? Sounds like relative. I'm just kidding. I would never say that. Sometimes people say that to me, but I would never say that. Sorry. I sit in my own splendor. I sit in my own radiance, and I have no fear. Waking, dreaming, sleeping. What are they to me, or even ecstasy? What is far or near, outside or inside, gross or subtle? I sit in my own splendor, dissolving the mind, or the highest meditation, the world and all its works, life or death, what are they to me? I sit in my own radiance. Why talk of wisdom, the three ends of life or oneness? Why talk of these? Now I live in my heart. Cheers. '20. I am Shiva. I am fulfilled. The elements of nature, the body and the senses, what are they to me, or the mind? What is emptiness or despair? What are holy books or knowledge of the self or the mind, even when it is free of the senses, or happiness or freedom from desire? I am always one without two. Knowledge or ignorance, freedom or bondage, what are they? What is I, or mine, or this, or the form of the true self? I am always one. What do I care for freedom in life or in death, or for my present karma? I am always without I. So where is the one who acts or enjoys? And what is the rising or the vanishing of thought? What is the invisible world or the visible? In my heart, I am one. What is this world? Who seeks freedom or wisdom or oneness? Who is bound or free? In my heart, I am one. What is creation or dissolution? What is seeking at the end and the end of seeking? Who is the seeker? What has he found? I am forever pure. What do I care who knows what is known or how it is known? What do I care for knowledge? What do I care what is or what is not? I am forever still. What are joy or sorrow, distraction or concentration, understanding or delusion? I am always without thought. What is happiness or grief? What is here and now or beyond? I am forever pure. What is illusion or the world? What is the little soul, or God himself. One without two, I am always the same. I sit in my heart. What need is there for striving or stillness? What is freedom or bondage? What are holy books or teachings? What is the purpose of life? Who is the disciple and who is the master? For I have no bounds. I am Shiva. Nothing arises in me, in whom nothing is single, nothing is double, nothing is not. What more is there to say? Tetelestai. It's an inside joke. Are you inside? Yeah, that's the end. Okay. There's notes at the end, but I'm more interested in the beginning. Okay, so the dedication. For my beloved Ma. I thought it said me. Okay, that's strikingly different. My eyes aren't what they used to be. At her feet, in his heart, again and again I bow. Okay, all right. I thought it was for my beloved me. That's different. Okay. Foreword. The Ashtavakra Gita, which Dr. Byron... we haven't had any music in this episode so far. Why don't we play a little music, Editor Edward? I'm sure that's lovely. Probably on brand for me, I would imagine. Libera? All right. Okay. The Ashtavakra Gita, which Dr. Byron has so ably translated here, is known under several different names. For example, I need my magnifying glass. Peanut butter sandwiches. Adhyatmasastra. Avadutanubhuti. Jananandasamukaya. You like my Sanskrit pronunciation? It's pretty expert, don't you think? All right, and so forth, as well as variants on the Ashtavakra Gita title, such as Ashtavakra Sukta and Ashtavakra Samhita. This variation in its naming suggests its essential anonymity, a feature which superficially would link it with the anonymous literature par excellence of the epics and Puranas, as would also both parts of the name Ashtavakra Gita. There have been, of course, numerous texts called Gita, composed in imitation of the Bhagavad Gita. Somewhere up here, I think that might have been it, or it's around here somewhere. Excuse me. Yes, composed, yes, which is perhaps the most famous single part of the Mahabharata. And most of these are parentheses, or at any rate claim to be, end parentheses, incorporated in one or another of the Puranas. There are, however, a few Gitas which make no such claim but are fully independent, and it is to these that the Ashtavakra Gita belongs. as is only to be expected from its clearly Vedantin outlook. Unlike many such Gitas, the Ashtavakra Gita is not a mere reworking of the Bhagavad Gita, and does not even quote directly from it, although there is little doubt that its author was well acquainted with the Bhagavad Gita. For example, echoes of Bhagavad Gita 5:8 through 9 are probably seen in Ashtavakra Gita 17:8 through 12 and 18:47 through 65. I wasn't numbering everything, so that's not going to help. If you're only... Never mind. Occasionally, these independent Gitas are named after their supposed author rather than with a title indicating their sectarian affiliation. Two instances are the Uttatya Gita and the Vamadeva Gita, both found in the Mahabharata. Parentheses at Mahabharata 12:91 through 92 and 93 through 94. Shouldn't you just say 91 through 94? End parentheses. Similarly, Ashtavakra first appears as the protagonist of the episode usually termed the Ashtavakriya, but sometimes known as the Ashtavakra Gita. Mahabharata 132 through 134. An episode which was probably inserted into the Mahabharata during the course of its expansion, but is nevertheless alluded to in the other epic, the Ramayana. At a later point in its growth, Ramayana 6, 107, 16. Don't know what that means. In this episode, maybe through 16? It's 6.107.16. Maybe book 6, chapter 107, verse 16? Something like that. In this episode, Ashtavakra, who appears as something of a child prodigy, at the age of 12 is able to defeat Janaka's Suta, parentheses, bard or herald, and parentheses, Bondin in riddling debate, parentheses, probably a later form of the Vedantic ritual Brahmodyas, or contests about Brahman, end parentheses, although the numerical context in which they engage, parentheses, with each in turn composing a verse which lists concepts or entities characteristic of the numbers from 1 upward, end parentheses, is very different in form. Its underlying concern with Brahman is probably the reason why Ashtavakra was chosen as the expounder of the Ashtavakra Gita. If so, it is interesting that the Sutta Bondin is replaced as the other main figure by Janaka, who is well known as one of the major debaters in the Upanishads. You might even go so far as to say he was a master debater. Sorry, couldn't resist. Okay, the Mahabharata episode interprets Ashtavakra's name as meaning crooked in 8 ways, and explains it as resulting from his father's curse, rather obviously an etymological legend, a secondary explanation for an otherwise inexplicable name. The same mechanism of the curse is invoked in the story about Ashtavakra found in the Puranas. I can relate with that a little bit. My last name, or Edward's last name, being Reeb, I've traced to the Germanic linguistic root to rub. which I choose to interpret as that he was a polisher of lenses or whatever. Usually, I mean, at least in English, you have potter, baker, things like that. Family, the guild, the caste, if you will, the career that was passed down from parent to child, father to son. Old-timey way of doing things. So Reeb, no idea what it means. Nobody knows. Nobody. The internet doesn't know. If you have any ideas, R-E-I-B, I would love to know. Rich Guardian, Free Man, it's a mystery. That's my name. All right, sorry. Right, where was I? I haven't the slightest idea. Yes, this Mahabharata explains the legend. The same mechanism of the curse is invoked in the story about Ashtavakra, found in the Puranas. We read that already, thank you. But this time, Ashtavakra curses the apsaras, who mock his deformity, which is much irascible, that sounds familiar. Weasable, that's Monty Python, never mind. Okay, and liable to utter curses at the slightest provocation. What have I committed myself to? How many pages of this are there? Okay. Yes, the slightest provocation. Both stories are found together in later Sanskrit literature. For example, the Ayodhyamahatmya. The same deformity and readiness to curse are found also in the modern Indian languages. In a story found in Adbhutaryas, excuse me, Bengali Ramayana, and the Svarga Khanda. When was it written? That's all I really want to know. Give me a year. I'm curious. When and where was this first found? I'm getting no information so far about any of that. All right, maybe later it'll mention it. We'll see. In a story found in we said that the Svarga Khanda of the Bengali Padma Purana. My difficulty with pronunciating things is responsible for the 1-star rating on Audible. Amazon tricked me into uploading these or into posting all these as podcasts on Audible. I didn't know it was going to be Audible, so it's being put forth as books on tape. And here I am going, when in actuality this is just a silly YouTube channel that I decided to take audio-only files of in red. Like, after the fact, I was like, hey, you know what would be funny if I made audio-only versions of all these and put them up on a podcast and put them on Spotify and Amazon. Then Amazon's like, put them on Amazon. I'm like, what's Amazon podcast? Nobody looks at nobody. No, but not a single person has ever gone on Amazon to listen to podcasts. And then they just slide it on over to Audible. Free content for Amazon. Sorry. You have to sign up for Audible. And you get it's free for a month, and then you have to pay for it. And I'm not getting paid for this. Stupid. So, I guess I'm the one who's stupid in that case, right? All right. A mother takes advantage of both what? To make her son whole. She gives birth to a son, Bhagirata, who is just a lump of flesh without bones, and following Vasista's advice, places him where he will see Ashtavakra, and, as anticipated, excite Ashtavakra's wrath by his laughter, which, since it is not ridiculing Ashtavakra, leads in fact to his healing. In several versions of the Manasamangal of Bengal, Ashtavakra curses Manasa's younger sister, Neto. In an Oriya work, the 16th century Shunya Samhita, it is said that Ashtavakra curses the Yadavas for some petty reason. Okay. However, there is nothing in these later traditions about Ashtavakra which is in any way helpful in understanding his role in the Ashtavakra Gita or why he was chosen to give a name to this essentially anonymous text. We are left with the significance of the context of the Mahabharata episode as the only real clue. It is perhaps the relevance of that alone, combined with the similarity in title to the Bhagavad Gita, which has encouraged many Indian scholars to see it as belonging to the same period, and thus as dating to around 4th century before Common Era. That's pretty old. Right? Sounds a little like Adavika to me. No. Maybe. No. Maybe. All right. Yeah. Yes. Right. Where was I? There therefore are certain radical Advaitin views found in the Ashtavakra Gita, which occur also in Gaudapada's writings as anticipating his ideas. In reality, In reality, however, the Ashtavakra Gita as a whole reveals a form of Advaita Vedanta, which has undoubtedly undergone a long line of development and must at least be later than Samkhara with an M, the renowned codifier of the Advaita system. Doctrinally, the text has much in common with Sadananda's Vedantasara and Vidyaranya's Jivan Muktiviveka from the 14th and 15th centuries, while in its adaptation of an epic setting to the propagation of an Advaitin viewpoint, it has analogies with the Yoga Vasista, a monumental 12th or 13th century recasting. I wonder if that dedication was from Thomas Byron to his ma. I think it probably was. Anyway, a monumental 12th or 13th century recasting of the Ramayana as the basis for a passionate exposition of Advaita. Gaudapada was the first exponent of Advaita Vedanta and traditionally is held to have been the teacher of Samkhara's teacher, but more probably lived about 3 centuries earlier than Samkhara. Gaudapada's main doctrine was that of non-origination, according to which the whole world is merely an appearance. Nothing ever really comes into being. Since nothing other than Brahman really exists, and the whole world is an illusion like a dream. Indeed, he goes so far as to declare that there is in principle no difference between waking and dreaming in Mandukya Karika 2:4, thus abolishing a distinction on which Samkhara later insists. In the radicalism of his position on some points, and in the evident similarities to Buddhist thought. Really? Because my buddy Pymander is over there at Buddhist Books Podcast reading the Tipitaka, and there's not a whole lot of similarity, to be honest. I mean, maybe one or two things in common, but a lot not in common. For example, you're supposed to meditate. You're, supposed to strive for non-attack, all the things that he says not to do. Maybe the relationship is that whoever wrote the Ashtavakra Gita is familiar with Buddhism and says, fuck it, says you don't need that. There's the similarity. Okay, a lot of similarities between Anton LaVey and St. Paul in that case, right? Oh boy, where was I? Who cares? This is all kind of long. All right, I'll keep reading though, because you might not have this book and you might be interested in this information, so you're welcome. Da-da-da-da-da-da. You're welcome. Who put the sun in the sky? Moana. Yeah, okay, sorry. Samkara, as a founder of Advaita Vedanta and author of Brahma, I've already read that. His central doctrine of identity and... Where was the part about it being similar to Buddhism? I don't know. Is it somewhere on this page? Weird. Was it on the previous page? Weird. I'll just keep reading. Oh, here we go, to Buddhist thought. Gaudapada exhibits a more extreme position than Samkara and also than the Ashtavakra Gita. Samkara, as the founder of Advaita Vedanta and author of the Brahmasutrabhasya, is the pivotal figure not only in philosophical views of the Advaita system, but also, to an extent often not sufficiently realized in its organizational structure and hence its subsequent popularity. His central doctrine of the identity of Atman and Brahman, of the individual self with the ground of the universe, is based on the Vedas, reconciling their apparent contradictions by recourse to the exegetical device of the two levels of truth, already well established in Buddhist thought. Much as Samkara is admired as a philosopher, philosophy was not in fact his prime concern, but the tool with which to achieve moksha, liberation, for himself and others. The multiple and finite entities of the phenomenal world are essentially identical with Brahman, the Absolute, and it is only our ignorance or misunderstanding which prevents our seeing this. The multiplicity and individuality of phenomena lie in their separate identities, which avidya superimposes on the Absolute. When we perceive the world around us, we do perceive something but our mistake. Our avidya consists in taking it as something other than Brahman. This basic teaching of Samkara embodies repeatedly in illustrations such as the rope and the snake, or the silver and the mother of pearl, which have become part of the stock imagery of later Advaita. For Samkara, the nature of avidya is indescribable, since if it were entirely unreal, we should not be entrapped by it, and if it were real, then Brahman would not be the sole reality. Thus he denies the absolute reality of the world in order to affirm the sole reality of Brahman, with which in its essential nature the Atman is identical. However, the individual, that's like the great self of the universe, Atman. So like God and the great self of the universe are one, therefore I am God, like that, and nothing is real. Shiva and Parvati used to have this argument back and forth where Shiva would say, I'm the great self of the universe and nothing is real, and Parvati would be like, fucking, this is real, bah, and argue on behalf of the realness of the material world and nature. And their argument was never settled. So it's one side of the story, you might say. All right. It's like oversimplification to say that it is Indian philosophy in a similar way that Anton LaVey's Church of Satan is Western philosophy. In other words, it's not the totality of Western philosophy, but it is a part of Western philosophy. In a similar way, this is Indian philosophy, but not the totality of Indian philosophy. Right? Makes sense. Okay. All right. I'll keep reading. We've just got another page and a half of this before we get to some good stuff. There is good stuff. I looked ahead, and I was like, oh, I remember this. And then it reminded me of something else I want to read at the very end of this episode. So, for the 1%, the select few who haven't already gotten bored and clicked away, that's what you have to look forward to. For samskara, the nature of avidya is indescribable, which we've already read. However, the individual self is a combination of reality and appearance, real insofar as it is Atman and thus Brahman, but illusionary insofar as it is limited and finite. Brahman, though, is not just an abstract concept, but the goal of spiritual quest. Release is achieved with the arrival of true knowledge. The realization, I think I'm dirtier than Gwydion at times, the realization that oneself and Brahman are in truth identical, full stop. Okay. The awakening of this realization is therefore the overriding aim of all Samkara's teachings. Later, Advaita may sometimes become mainly scholastic, parentheses indeed, debate on the nature of avidya and where it resides was to divide it into two sub-schools, and parentheses, but individual writers later were to present these ideas with all the fervor and persuasiveness of Samkara himself. At a later date, a definite trend developed of using a somewhat more literary form as the vehicle for the teaching, often adapting the easy shloka meter of the epics and Puranas as the medium, and sometimes, as we have seen, even borrowing from the epic narrative in which works like Yoga Visista and the Adhyatma Ramayana, full stop. It is this tradition that what would the author of the Ashtavakra Gita think of this introduction? It's a rhetorical question. Ashtavakra Gita stands and within which it has achieved considerable popularity, not only in India but also in the West. The first translation into a European language was made as much as 120 years ago, an edition published in 1868. So this voice is from 1988, okay, which is 180 years ago. At Florence, with Italian translation by Carlos Giussani. Its author used 3 manuscripts from Tübingen and Petersburg. The more recent edition, with German translation by Richard Hauschild, is based on 3 manuscripts in Leipzig, as well as those by Giussani. Many other manuscripts exist in other European libraries, to say nothing of India. For example, including 2 which by their dates are older than any used by Giussani and Hauschild. However, a sample collection of these 2 demonstrates that there has been little variation in transmission of the text, though some in the titles given to the sections of the dialogue. The texts significance for modern Vedantins is well illustrated by the tradition that Vivekananda was introduced to by the Ashtavakra Gita by Ramakrishna and valued the text. Its popularity is intimately connected with its character, for in it is many ways as much poetic. For it is in many ways as much poetic as dialectic, using the standard images of the Advaita system to excellent effect. It has, with good reason, been characterized as the outpourings of a realized individual. That was the chair squeaking, by the way. Or a delusional person who is peaking on LSD, one or the other. Certainly, it is traditional for... I'm just kidding. I mean, I'm not kidding. I'm not meaning to be disrespectful, but I've done LSD and talked to people on LSD, and they sound a lot like this. Okay. Yes, Ashtavakra Gita, as traditional form of dialect between Ashtavakra Gita as teacher and Janaka as pupil, bears very little relationship to the message actually propounded. However, rather than trying to characterize the text any further, let me conclude, getting toward the end of this, and give the reader the opportunity of savoring it in this new and elegant translation by Dr. Byron. Can you imagine if we had read all this before we read the text? Jesus. Good thing we waited till the end, I'd say. There have been English translations before, but this is the first to capture the spirit of the original. Really? Who's got the authority to say that? In its freshness and directness, I warmly recommend it. J.L. Brockington. Well, he, of course, has the authority to speak on behalf of 4th century before Common Era Indian philosophy, because he is from the Department of Sanskrit at Edinburgh University. Okay, acknowledgements. In 1980, with the help of John Simon Guggenheim Foundation, the John Simon Guggenheim Foundation, I undertook a study of absurdism, which led me to an investigation of paradox in scriptural poetry, and finally to the present version of the Ashtavakra Gita. I wish to thank the Foundation for its support and encouragement. For their scholarly guidance, I wish to also thank Dr. Richard Gombrich, professor of Sanskrit at Oxford University, perhaps Rich Gombrich, who kindly clarified several difficult verses, and most especially Dr. John L. Brockington, senior lecturer in Sanskrit at Edinburgh University, who reviewed and amended my translation and my commentary at every turn with a generous patience. Okay, cut the music. This is where we're going to read the translator's introduction called The Mystery of Awareness. So, Edward, choose something else.
You are my hiding place,
Edward, I can't read when the song has words in it. That's first of all. Second of all, what are you doing? I mean, we all love John Michael Talbot, but can you play something else? Nice. Okay. I remember the moment clearly. I had escaped from my sisters over the rocks and around the point. I was barely 7. Above me, a rough escarpment of boulders singing in the midday heat. At my feet, a rock pool of perfect, inviolable stillness, and beyond, the blue vastness of the South Pacific. There was no other living creature. I was by myself, barefooted, between the cliff and the ocean. As I squatted there, watching the reflection of the wind in the unrippled pool, hearing its exhilaration high above me in the bright emptiness of the sky, I became aware for the first time of awareness itself. I had no name for it, but I could almost feel it, as if it had substance, like the water in the rock pool, or breath, like the shouting wind. I saw that I was entirely by myself in a boundless ocean of awareness. In the same instant, I understood that awareness is the single mystery of life, that it enfolds all other mysteries, even the secret of the separate self. From that moment, I was indelibly astonished, and I knew that all my life I would be pinching myself and asking, what is awareness? Nothing else would ever command my attention so completely. How could it? For nothing else mattered next to the constant pressure, the single compulsion of this mystery. A quarter of a century went by, and one day my teacher placed in my hand a copy of Mukherjee's edition of the Ashtavakra Gita. I had by then, in the ordinary course of my seeking, read a great deal of scripture, enough to know the truth of Ashtavakra's admonition. Halfway through his own song, quote, "My child, you can talk about holy books all you like, but until you forget everything, you will never find yourself." End quote. Understanding the vanity of Scripture, I hardly expected Ashtavakra to solve in a single epiphany the mystery of awareness. And yet, as I read his spare and simple verses, I felt that here at last were words which in some measure consumed my astonishment. They spoke so directly and so modestly. Did you read the same scripture I did? They seemed so austere and yet so generous. I found once more a child of 7, tipped between the sea and the sky, but hearing now in the wind's exuberance a clearer music, touching the heart of the mystery. Quote, "What is the rising or the vanishing of thought? What is the visible world or the invisible? What is the little soul or God himself?" End quote. Awareness, pure awareness, the clear space, the sky, the heart of awareness. Ashtavakra's words begin after almost everything else has been said. They barely touch the page. They are often on the point of vanishing. They are the first melting of the snow high in the mountains, a clear stream flowing over smooth and shining pebbles. Theirs is the radiance of the winter sky above. Trishul, Kailash, Annapurna. My Satguru, Neem Karoli Baba, called the Ashtavakra Gita, quote, "the purest of scriptures," end quote. All its beauty is in the transparency, its enraptured and flawless purity. It is written as a dialogue between King Janaka, the father of Sita, and his guru, Ashtavakra. But this is just a literary device, unsupported by any internal drama, and I have done away with it in my version. The Gita has only one voice, Ashtavakra's, a voice of singular compassion and uncompromised clarity. He is not concerned to argue. This is not speculative philosophy. It is a kind of knowledge. Ashtavakra speaks as a man who has already found his way and now wishes to share it. His song is a direct and practical transcript of experience, a radical account of ineffable truths. He speaks, moreover, in a language that is, for all its modesty, physical and direct. He is not abstract, though some translations, laboring to render his special terms faithfully, make him sound difficult, even obtrusive. On the contrary, Ashtavakra is very simple. We are all one self. The self is pure awareness. This self, this flawless awareness, is God. There is only God. Everything else is an illusion. The little self, the world, the universe, all these things arise with the thought I. That is, with the idea of separate identity. The little I invents the material world, which in our ignorance we strive hard to sustain, forgetting our original oneness, bound tightly in our imaginary separateness. We spend our lives mastered by a spacious sense of purpose and value, endlessly constrained by our habit of individuation, the creature of preference and desire. We continually set one thing against another until the mischief and misery of choice consume us. Right. But our true nature is pure and choiceless awareness. We are already and always fulfilled. It is easy, says Ashtavakra. You are the clear space of awareness, pure and still, in whom there is no birth, no striving, no I. Then how do we recover our original awareness? How do we dispel the illusion of separateness? Some commentators suppose that Ashtavakra is really not concerned to answer these questions. For them, his Gita is a transcendent confession, too pure to be useful. Others see it as a manual of conduct. Others see it as earnestly dialectic. There it is. A manual of conduct. Both are right. Ashtavakra is indeed wild, playful, utterly absorbed in the self. Since words are of the mind, which arises only to obscure awareness, words are indeed folly. And who would teach folly? Ashtavakra would. Ashtavakra would. There we go. His is an entirely compassionate and practical madness, even while cutting the ground from under our feet. He shows us at every turn what to do. With a crazy solicitude, he tells us how to end our self-estrangement. Be happy. Love yourself. Don't judge others. Forgive. Always be simple. Don't make distinctions. Give up the habit of choice. Let the mind dissolve. Give up preferring and desiring. Desire only your own awareness. Give up identifying with the body and the senses. Give up your attachment to meditation and service. Give up your attachment to detachment. Give up giving up. Reject nothing, accept nothing, be still, be above all, be happy. In the end, you will find yourself. just by knowing how things are. It would be perverse and humorless to suppose that just because Ashtavakra, with his irreducible non-dualism, considers meditation merely a distracting habit, he means us to abandon our practice. Of course, from the perspective of unconditional freedom, where nothing makes any difference, meditation seems a comically self-important waste of time. But Ashtavakra makes it plain. Quote, the moment a fool gives up his spiritual practices, he falls prey to fancies and desires. End quote. God help the seeker who presumes that since he is already and always fulfilled, he can give up trying. That's Thomas Byram and his wisdom, as opposed to Ashtavakra. All right, no, but yeah, I agree. I agree with Thomas here. I think mostly half and half. The heart of Ashtavakra's advice is not to give up our practice, but to abandon our strenuous indolence. Striving is the root of sorrow, he says, but who understands this? Look at the master. He says, who is lazier? He has trouble even blinking. He certainly does not run around puffing himself up looking for God or liberation, busily making excuses for not finding himself. Dealing with our ignorance also means, for almost all of us, finding someone like Ashtavakra to help us. For me, it was Gordon. Thank you, Gordon. Hope you're doing well wherever you are. We cannot easily break the spell ourselves. Here again, Ashtavakra is very practical. At least half of the book describes the nature of the master, the man who has found his way. It is an austere and enriching portrait. The master is a child, a fool, a man asleep, a leaf tumbling in the wind. Inside, he is utterly free. He does exactly as he pleases. Rules mean nothing to him. He doesn't care who makes fun of him, because he is always playing and having a wonderful time. He lives as if he had no body. He seems to walk on air. He is unsmudged, like the clear sky or the smooth and shining surface of a vast lake. Because we are subject to the dualities which he has transcended, we glimpse his nature only through paradox. He sees, but he sees nothing. He sees what cannot be seen. He knows, but knows nothing. He sleeps soundly without sleeping. He dreams without dreaming. He is busy, but he does nothing. He is not alive, nor is he dead. His secret, and the ultimate paradox, is that he stands on his own. He is completely by himself. Only by an absolute independence has he discovered his absolute oneness with all things. Who was this Ashtavakra, this uncompromising poet and saint? Since Ashtavakra's whole point is that individual identity is an illusion, it is a perfect irony that the only certain thing we can say about him is that he was not Ashtavakra. He was an anonymous master who adopted Ashtavakra's character as he found it represented in a number of tales in classic Indian literature and used it as a suitably faceless mask through which to deliver his gospel of self-effacement. The best-known tale in the Mahabharata explains how he got his name, which means 8 twists. When still in his mother's womb, Ashtavakra overheard his father Kahoda reciting the Vedas. Though still unborn, he already knew the scriptures, and hearing his father's mistakes, he called out to correct him. Kaboda was insulted and cursed him, and in due course he was born with deformed limbs. Some years later, at the court of Janaka, Kaboda engaged in a debate with the great scholar Bandin, son of King Varuna. He was defeated, and Bandin had him drowned. When Ashtavakra was 12, he discovered what had happened. He went at once to Janaka's court, where he beat Bandin in debate. Bondin then explained that his father had not been drowned, but had been banished to the bottom of the sea to serve King Varuna. He released Kaboda, who wished at once to lift the curse from his son. He told Ashtavakra to bathe in the river Samanga. When he came out of the water, his body was straight. There is another story about him in the Vishnu Purana. As Ashtavakra was performing penances underwater, celestial nymphs gathered and sang for him. He was so delighted, he gave them a boon. They would all marry Krishna. But when he came out of the water, the nymphs saw his deformities and made fun of him. Ashtavakra added a curse to the boon. After their marriage, they would all fall into the hands of robbers. And so it happened. They all married Krishna, but after his death, despite the efforts of Arjuna, they were all carried off by robbers. The moral of both stories is, of course, that even the ugliest form is filled with God's radiance. The body is nothing, the self is everything. There may be as well some notion of the sacrificial value of deformity, of the kind we find in St. Augustine when he remarks of the breaking of Christ's body on the cross, quote, his deformity forms you, end quote. So the Ashtavakra Gita was written by an unknown master who took his inspiration from the contest between Ashtavakra and Bondin, which Ashtavakra wins by demonstrating the absolute oneness of God. Though he casts his verses as a debate, there is, as I have said, no real dialogue. Only one voice is heard, speaking through the assumed character, and with the borrowed yet potent authority and special facelessness of Ashtavakra. And it is entirely appropriate that the real master of the Gita remains forever unknown, since, as he has Ashtavakra say of himself, for what he has become there is no name. We not only know next to nothing about him, we cannot even be sure when he lived. Sanskrit was so static, especially after Panini's account of it became prescriptive a little before Christ. That its literature is hard to date on linguistic evidence alone, since we have only the slimmest literary, historical, or philosophical evidence besides. It is very hard to debate the Ashtavakra Gita with any accuracy. Indian editors usually argue, with some sentimentality, that it was written in the same age as or just before the Bhagavad Gita, which they date to the 5th or 4th century before Common Era. Western editors not only place the Bhagavad Gita much later, probably in the 1st or 2nd century Common Era, but they generally agree that the Ashtavakra Gita comes a good deal later still. Without rehearsing the arguments, we may safely guess that it was written rather in the 8th century by a follower of Shankara, or in the 14th century during a resurgence of Shankara's teaching. As a distillation of monistic Vedanta, it certainly has all the marks of Shankara's purification of ancient Shaivism. Ashtavakra ends his Gita with a litany of self-dismissive questions, all of them utterly rhetorical. What is good or evil, life or death, freedom or bondage, illusion or the world, creation or dissolution, the self or the not-self? The Sanskrit literally asks where, rather than what. Where is the little soul or God himself? Within the ever-fulfilled and ubiquitous self, there is no place for these or any distinctions. There is no place even for spiritual enquiry. Who is the seeker, Ashtavakra asks. What has he found? What is seeking, or the end of seeking? These final questions dissolve even the voice which asks them. Who is the disciple and who is the master? With his last gesture of self-erasure, the nameless master is finally free to declare his real identity, which he shares unconditionally with all beings. I have no bounds. I am Shiva. Nothing arises in me, in whom nothing is single, nothing is double. Nothing is not. What more is there to say? Some years ago, when we first settled in our ashram in Florida, we used to go out riding in the early morning. My teacher always insisted that we take with us a much-thumbed, broken-backed, but well-loved copy of the Ashtavakra Gita. We would saddle our horses before dawn and ride out along the banks of the Sebastian River. I remember the frost glazing the water, the ghostly breath of the horses, and on the western horizon the thin crescent of a Shiva moon. Once, looking back when the horses shied, I saw a panther standing in our tracks, silent and unafraid, smelling our voices. Just before the sun came up, we would dismount and, gathering frosted palm fans and handfuls of oak duff, make a fire. And as the sun rose above the bright water, we read aloud from the Gita. It is easy. God made all things. There is only God. When you know this, desire melts away. Clinging to nothing, you become still. Thomas Byram, Kashi Foundation, July 1989. And that concludes the Ashtavakra Gita section of Chicken Philosophy. Maybe at some point in the future, I'll do an Esoteric Nerd episode in which maybe I interview Amandeep for a fourth time about this, or someone, I don't know. But if, at some point in the future, there's a conversation about this, then I'll put that in the playlist as the 5th video, but maybe that'll never happen. So we'll just assume that there's going to be 4, and this is the 4th and last, and it has been an honor to be the 4th and last reader of this on Chicken Philosophy. And as promised, the beginning of that, where he was talking about hiding from his sister and realizing awareness for the first time when he was 7 years old, reminded me of my little about the author bit. See, that's actually the name on my birth certificate, Edward Reeb, and one of the 4 uses that name as his moniker. Where I'm BT, he's Edward. Anyway, sorry about any confusion that might cause. About the author. Once, Edward's dad came in the room to say goodnight. And in the background, his mom said, "He's asleep. Don't wake him up." Dad left, and an indistinct argument began in the next room. From his crib, though unable to articulate it verbally, Edward knew that both of them were somehow unaware of something which he knew was obvious, too obvious, really, and easily overlooked. We are here. We exist. All of this is happening. Stop your clicking. I know you're frozen. That's not part of the about the other. That's me talking to this infernal machine. Stop making noises, please. I'm trying to have a moment here. Years later, when he was about 6 years old, Edward looked around and saw no other human being, only the mailbox the trees, the street, the house behind him, and the neighbors' houses. Knowing it was taboo, he walked to the middle of the street, laid down on his back, and closed his eyes. In that moment, with the rush of adrenaline, he remembered that day in his crib, and the two moments connected in the sharp lucidity of present-time awareness. We are here. We exist. This is all really happening. Edward made a promise to himself then that he would remember this more often and stop getting so distracted by all the many small things arranging and rearranging in the world of the senses, social dynamics, ego, and so on. He felt that these 2 moments of lucid presence and awareness had been too few and far between, and needed to happen more often, until one day the moment would be ongoing and never stop.